You're a ghost out here, and ghosts don't get a voice. Careful. Some ghosts don't stay buried.
You can ignore a man, until the moment you realize he was never just a man. The snow fell in slow, heavy sheets, swallowing the sound of the city one layer at a time, turning the neon glare of Manhattan into a blurred watercolor of reds and blues that bled across the frozen sidewalks, and behind one of the busiest bars on 8th Avenue, where laughter leaked through steel doors and music thumped like a distant heartbeat, an old man moved quietly through the alley as if he didn't belong to the same world as everyone else, Samuel Carter, bundled in a worn army green coat. That had seen more winters than most people on that street, pushed a rattling cart lined with black trash bags while his dog Rusty padded beside him, paws leaving soft prints in the fresh snow, the two of them working in silence, invisible to the crowd just feet away, invisible to the bartender who had tossed him the job with a shrug, invisible to the passing headlights that never slowed. And yet there was something about the way Sam moved that didn't match the image, something steady. Something precise, like a man who measured space without thinking, like someone who had once learned to survive by noticing what others missed, his breath slow, controlled, his eyes scanning without turning his head, while Rusty suddenly stopped, ears rising, a low growl building deep in his chest, not loud, not aggressive, just enough to break the rhythm of the falling snow, and Sam froze for half a second, not startled, just listening, because somewhere beyond the hum of generators and the muffled bass of the bar, there was another sound, sharp, uneven, a voice too young to carry that kind of fear, echoing from deeper in the alley, and without a word, Sam set the cart aside, his gloved hand brushing briefly against the inside of his coat where something metallic rested against his chest, before he stepped forward into the dim light where the alley narrowed, the snow untouched ahead of him except for scattered footprints that told a story he read instantly, 3 sets circling. One backing away, uneven, stumbling, and as he turned the corner, the scene unfolded exactly as he had already pictured it, a boy no older than 10 pressed against a brick wall, his breath coming in short bursts of white vapor, 3 teenagers crowding him, their movements restless, careless, unaware of anything beyond their own moment, and Sam didn't raise his voice, didn't rush in, didn't even change his pace, he simply adjusted his path, positioning himself just enough to shift the balance of the space, his presence subtle but undeniable, Rusty stepping forward with him, silent now, alert, and for a moment nothing happened. Just snow drifting between them, just the quiet hum of the city beyond the alley. Until one of the boys glanced up, irritation flickering into confusion, because something about the old man standing there didn't fit the script they had written in their heads, and Sam's eyes, calm and steady, met his without challenge, without fear, just a quiet certainty that felt heavier than any threat, the kind of stillness that made noise seem unnecessary, and in that suspended second, before anyone spoke, before anything escalated, the air shifted in a way none of them could explain, as if the night itself had just decided to pay attention. The boy did not speak at first, his small frame pressed tightly against the cold brick as if the wall itself might offer protection, his eyes wide and fixed on Sam with a kind of desperate calculation, trying to decide if this quiet stranger was help or just another unknown variable in a night that had already gone wrong, and Sam did not rush him, did not fill the silence with empty reassurance, he simply shifted his stance slightly, enough to place himself between the boy and the others. Without making it look like a move, his shoulders relaxed, his hands visible, his breathing steady, while Rusty stepped just half a pace ahead, not aggressive, not barking, just present, a silent line drawn in the snow that the 3 teenagers seemed suddenly unsure about crossing, their earlier confidence thinning in the face of something they could not quite define, because the old man did not argue, did not threaten, did not even look angry, and that absence of expected reaction created a hesitation that none of them were prepared for, one of them letting out a short laugh that sounded forced, glancing at the others as if to confirm the script was still intact, but the rhythm had already been broken, and Sam's voice, when it came, was low and even, carrying just enough weight to be heard without effort, telling the boy to step behind him, nothing more, no explanation, no urgency, just a simple instruction delivered with the quiet certainty of someone used to being followed without question, and the boy obeyed almost instantly, as if something in that tone bypassed fear entirely, his small boots crunching in the snow as he moved closer, gripping the fabric of Sam's coat for a brief second before letting go, and that single motion seemed to settle something in Sam's posture. His focus narrowing, his attention now fully on the space in front of him, reading distance, angles, exits, not as conscious thought but as instinct shaped long ago, while the teenagers shifted, exchanging looks that said they were no longer as sure of the moment as they had been seconds earlier, one of them muttering something under his breath before taking a step back, then another. The group's formation loosening as the weight of the situation changed without a single raised voice, and just like that, the tension began to dissolve, not with a confrontation, but with a quiet unraveling, until the alley was left with only the falling snow and the sound of distant traffic, the three figures disappearing into the night as if the moment had simply slipped away from them, and Sam did not watch them leave for long, his attention already returning to the boy, crouching slightly despite the stiffness in his joints, his eyes softening but his movements still precise as he checked the boy's breathing, the color in his face, the steadiness of his voice when he finally spoke, asking simple questions, grounding him, keeping him present, while Rusty circled once and settled close, a warm barrier against the cold, and somewhere beyond the alley, faint at first but growing louder, the distant wail of sirens began to cut through the snowfall, blue and red lights reflecting off the drifting flakes, approaching fast. And Sam's gaze lifted just slightly, not with relief, not with concern, but with the quiet awareness of a man who understood that sometimes the arrival of authority did not mean the situation was over, only that it was about to change. The sirens grew louder until they filled the alley, bouncing off brick and steel, turning the quiet snowfall into a stage of flashing blue and red, and within seconds 2 patrol cars slid to a stop. At the mouth of the alley, tires crunching over packed snow as doors opened and officers stepped out with practiced urgency, their boots heavy against the ground, their voices sharp but controlled as they moved toward the scene, and Sam did not stand up right away, he stayed where he was beside the boy, one hand steady near his shoulder, his presence calm and grounded while the world around him shifted into motion, because he had learned long ago that chaos often followed rescue, not before it. And the first officer to reach them slowed slightly, taking in the image of the old man, the dog, and the boy, his expression flickering with uncertainty for just a fraction of a second before training took over, asking quick questions, scanning for threats that were no longer there, while the boy tried to speak but his voice caught in his throat, his words tangled between fear and relief, and then a third vehicle arrived, larger, darker, its engine idling with a low authority that seemed to change the posture of everyone nearby, and from it stepped Chief Daniel Briggs, his coat crisp, his presence immediate, a man used to being the center of every situation he entered, his eyes sweeping the alley once before settling on Sam, and in that brief moment something unspoken passed across his face, not confusion, not curiosity, but recognition of a different kind, the kind that measures value in seconds and decides who matters and who does not, and without breaking stride he moved past Sam as if he were part of the background, focusing instead on the boy, kneeling slightly, his voice shifting into something practiced and reassuring as he asked for the boy's name, his condition, details that would soon become part of a report, part of a narrative, while officers behind him began to reposition, subtly creating space around the chief, and Sam slowly rose to his feet, the movement deliberate, his joints protesting just enough to remind him of the years, Rusty staying close at his side, and for a moment Sam's gaze rested on Briggs, not challenging, not defensive, just observant, the way he had looked at everything else that night, and Briggs finally acknowledged him with a glance that lingered just long enough to register dismissal, a quick assessment filed and closed, and then he turned slightly, speaking louder now, directing attention, shaping the scene with his words, describing how officers had responded quickly, how the situation had been contained, how the boy was now safe, and the phrasing was smooth, confident, already forming a version of events that left no space for interruption, while one of the younger officers looked between Sam and the chief, a flicker of hesitation crossing his face as if something did not quite align, but he said nothing, because the hierarchy was clear, and the story was already being written, and Sam did not step forward, did not correct anything, he simply stood there, snow gathering on his shoulders, listening as the moment shifted away from him, his presence fading once again into the edges of the scene, except for one thing, the boy, who turned his head, his eyes searching for Sam in the growing crowd, and when he found him, there was a brief, silent connection, a recognition that cut through the noise. But it lasted only a second before an officer guided him toward the waiting vehicle, the door opening, the lights flashing brighter, and as the boy disappeared into the safety of the car, the alley felt colder somehow, emptier, and Sam's hand drifted once more toward his coat, toward the small piece of metal hidden beneath the fabric, his fingers brushing it lightly, not as a habit, but as a reminder, before he let his hand fall back to his side. His eyes lifting to the falling snow as if measuring something far beyond the moment, already sensing that what had just ended was not the story, only the beginning of something that would unfold in a very different kind of battlefield. The snow kept falling as if nothing had changed, as if the alley had not just held a moment that could have gone very differently, and within minutes the scene began to dissolve into procedure, officers moving with routine efficiency, radios crackling, statements half-formed and already being shaped into something cleaner, something easier to present, and Sam stood just outside that movement, close enough to hear, far enough to be ignored, his presence once again fading into the edges where people like him were expected to exist, unnoticed and unrecorded, while Rusty shook the snow from his coat and settled beside him, watching everything with quiet alertness, and across the alley Chief Briggs straightened up, brushing a gloved hand across his coat as if resetting himself for an audience that was not yet visible, his voice rising slightly, controlled and confident, giving instructions that carried just enough authority to direct attention without sounding forced, and a patrol officer nearby began repeating details into his radio, echoing the version that had already started to take shape, the one where response time was swift, where control was established, where the outcome belonged to the department, not to the quiet man standing 10 feet away, and Sam listened without reaction, his face unreadable, his eyes steady, but beneath that stillness something shifted, not anger, not frustration, just a recognition of a pattern he had seen before, where truth became flexible in the presence of rank, where silence was often mistaken for agreement, and he turned slightly, reaching for the handle of his cart as if preparing to leave, because leaving was what he had trained himself to do, to step out before the moment demanded explanation, to disappear before questions forced him back into a world he had long chosen to avoid, but before he could take a step, Briggs's voice cut through the space again, sharper this time, directed not at the officers, but at him, a simple call that carried no respect, only control, telling him to wait, and Sam paused, not because of the command, but because of the tone, slowly turning back, his posture unchanged, while Briggs approached with measured steps, stopping just close enough to establish presence, his eyes scanning Sam quickly, taking in the worn coat, the cart, the dog, categorizing him in seconds, and when he spoke, his voice dropped, low enough that it would not carry beyond the falling snow, but firm enough that the meaning was unmistakable, explaining that situations like this required clarity, that confusion helped no one, that sometimes it was better for certain details to remain simple, his words polished, almost reasonable on the surface. But the message beneath them clear, this was not a conversation, it was a boundary being drawn, and Sam held his gaze without challenge, his expression calm, listening as if the words were nothing more than background noise, while Rusty shifted slightly, sensing the change in tone even if he could not understand the language, and for a brief moment the alley seemed to narrow again, not physically, but in the way space feels when something important is happening quietly, and Briggs finished with a final sentence that did not sound like a threat, but carried the weight of one, reminding Sam that people like him did not want unnecessary attention, that staying out of official matters was usually the better choice, and then he stepped back, the conversation over before it had truly begun, turning away with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was already decided, while Sam remained where he was. The snow settling on his shoulders, his breath slow and even, his hand once again brushing against the inside of his coat where the small metal tag rested against his chest, and for the first time that night, his eyes did not follow the movement of the scene, they lifted instead toward the distant glow of the city lights, as if measuring something far beyond the alley, something that had just been set into motion without a single raised voice. The alley slowly emptied as the patrol cars pulled away one by one, their flashing lights fading into the snowfall until only the dim glow of the street remained, and with them went the noise, the authority, and the version of events that had already begun to solidify somewhere beyond Sam's reach, leaving behind nothing but the cold air and the quiet certainty that what had happened would not be told the way it actually unfolded. And Sam did not linger, he did not look back, he simply reached for the handle of his cart and resumed his work as if the interruption had been nothing more than a passing moment, his movement steady, deliberate, the rhythm returning to his steps as Rusty followed close beside him, their figures blending once again into the edges of the city where people passed without noticing, where stories began and ended without witnesses. And across the street a television flickered behind the glass of a late-night convenience store, its light casting a pale reflection onto the snow-covered sidewalk, drawing Sam's gaze for just a second as he moved past, not out of curiosity, but out of habit, the way a soldier once checked every flicker of movement without thinking, and inside, the screen showed a breaking news segment, the volume low but the captions bright enough to read even from outside, a headline forming across the bottom that spoke of a quick response, a successful intervention, a city kept safe by decisive leadership, and there, framed in clean studio lighting, stood Chief Briggs, his uniform crisp, his voice measured, recounting the incident with confidence, describing how his team had arrived, how control had been established, how the boy had been secured, every word placed carefully, leaving no room for interruption. No mention of the man who had been there before any of it began, and Sam watched for only a moment. His expression unchanged, before turning away, the image reflecting briefly in the glass before disappearing as he continued down the block, pushing the cart through slush and salt, the wheels rattling softly against uneven pavement, while Rusty glanced back once at the light before following, and for most people, that would have been the end of it, a story told, accepted, and forgotten, but not for everyone, because in a small editing room just a few miles away, where the hum of computers replaced the noise of the street, Lena Brooks sat hunched over a screen, her brow furrowed as she replayed a short clip again and again, the footage slightly grainy, captured from a distance, but clear enough to show something that did not align with the official narrative, her eyes narrowing not at the obvious, but at the subtle, the way the old man moved, the way he positioned himself, the way he checked the boy with practiced precision before any officer had arrived, and she paused the video. At a single frame, zooming in slowly, focusing not on the faces, but on a small detail partially hidden beneath the edge of a worn coat, a piece of metal catching the light for just a fraction of a second, something that did not belong to a man the city would overlook, something that carried weight far beyond the alley, and as she leaned closer, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, a quiet realization began to take shape, not loud, not dramatic, just a steady understanding that the story she had just watched on television was missing its most important piece, and somewhere out there, walking through the snow with a cart and a dog, was a man who had no intention of correcting it, which meant someone else would have to. Lena did not look away from the screen for a long time, the glow of the paused frame reflecting in her eyes as the city outside her window continued to move without noticing what she had just found, and she leaned back slightly in her chair, not with excitement, but with the quiet tension of someone who knew that a small detail could unravel something much larger, her fingers moving again, replaying the clip in slow motion, watching the old man step into the frame, watching the way he moved before anyone else reacted, and it was not dramatic, not loud, not something most people would notice, but to her it was unmistakable, because she had grown up around it, had seen it in the way her father used to carry himself even years after leaving the service, that same economy of motion, that same awareness of space, that same refusal to waste energy on unnecessary movement, and she paused again, zooming further into the flicker of metal beneath the coat, adjusting the contrast, sharpening the image just enough to make out the faint outline of stamped letters, not fully clear, but enough to suggest something official, something issued, something that did not belong to a man pushing a trash cart through a snow-covered alley, and her breath slowed as she sat there, the weight of the realization settling in without any need for dramatic reaction, because the story had already begun to shift in her mind, no longer a simple incident, no longer a routine report, but something layered, something incomplete, and she reached for her phone, scrolling quickly through contacts until she stopped on a name she had not called in months, her thumb hovering for just a second before pressing dial, the line ringing twice before a voice answered, steady and direct, and Lena did not waste time explaining everything, she simply described what she had seen, the alley, the timing, the way the man moved, the detail of the metal tag, and there was a pause on the other end, not confusion, not disbelief, just silence, the kind that meant something was being processed carefully, and then the voice spoke again, lower now, asking her to repeat the name if she had one, and Lena glanced back at the screen, at the frozen frame where the man's face was partially visible beneath the shadow of his coat, and she admitted that she did not have it yet, only the image. Only the feeling that something was wrong, and the voice on the other end exhaled slowly, telling her to send the footage immediately, no delay, no questions, and as the call ended, Lena did not hesitate, transferring the file, watching the progress bar move across the screen as if it carried more weight than data, because somewhere, someone else was about to see what she had seen, and outside, far from the quiet hum of the editing room, Sam continued down the street, the snow now thinner, the wind picking up slightly, his cart lighter as the night's work neared its end, Rusty still close at his side, and there was no sign in his posture that anything had changed, no urgency, no concern, just the same steady rhythm, the same quiet presence, but as he passed beneath a streetlight, the glow catching briefly on the edge of his coat, the small metal tag inside shifted just enough to press against his chest. A subtle reminder of something that had never truly left him, even if the world had chosen to forget, and somewhere across the city, in a place far removed from alleys and snow, a screen flickered to life, the same footage appearing again, this time in a room where silence carried a very different kind of weight. The room was quiet in a way that did not belong to ordinary places, the kind of silence that came from discipline rather than absence, where every movement had purpose and every sound carried weight, and the screen at the far end glowed softly against the dim light, replaying the footage Lena had sent, frame by frame, without commentary, because none was needed, and the man standing there did not sit, did not lean, he simply watched, his posture straight, his expression unreadable, as the old man in the alley stepped into view again, as the snow fell, as the moment unfolded with quiet precision, and when the clip ended, it did not restart immediately, it held on the final frame, frozen, as if giving the room time to catch up with something it already understood, and after a few seconds, the man stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in doubt, but in recognition, the kind that settled deep and fast. And his voice, when it came, was low, controlled, carrying authority that did not need to be raised. Asking only one question, the name, and when the answer came back that there was no confirmed identity yet, just a partial visual, just a hint of a tag, there was a brief pause, the kind that stretched just long enough to signal a shift, and then he reached forward, stopping the frame himself, zooming in with practiced hands, focusing not on the obvious, but on the small detail half hidden beneath the coat, the edge of metal catching light for a fraction of a second, and he leaned in slightly. His gaze fixed, his breathing steady, and then, almost imperceptibly, something changed in his expression, not shock, not surprise, but something heavier, something older, like a memory being pulled from a place it had not been touched in years, and he spoke again, quieter now, repeating a name that had not yet been confirmed, but carried enough certainty to make the room feel smaller, Samuel Carter, and no one corrected him. No one questioned it, because the way he said it left no room for doubt, and the silence that followed was different now, no longer neutral, but charged with meaning, because that name was not supposed to appear in a place like this, not in an alley, not attached to a man pushing a cart through the snow, and yet there it was, undeniable in the way the footage aligned with something only a few people would recognize, and the man straightened slowly, his hand resting briefly against the edge of the table as if grounding himself in the present, before turning slightly, giving a single instruction, simple and direct, find him, no urgency in the tone, but no room for delay either, and immediately the room shifted, quiet movement replacing stillness, calls beginning without being announced, information moving through channels that did not require explanation, while the screen behind them remained frozen on the image of the old man, still and unnoticed, and miles away. Unaware of any of it, Sam turned down a quieter street, the city thinning around him. As the night deepened, the snow easing into a light drift, his cart nearly empty now, his work almost done, Rusty brushing close to his leg with each step, and for a moment, beneath a flickering streetlight, Sam paused, not because he heard anything, not because he saw anything unusual, but because something in the air felt different, not threatening, not urgent, just a subtle shift, the kind that could not be explained but could not be ignored either, and he stood there for a second longer, his breath steady, his eyes scanning the empty street with the same quiet awareness he had carried all night, before continuing on, unaware that far beyond the reach of that streetlight, his name had just begun to move through a system that did not forget. Morning came slowly, the storm easing into a pale gray sky that stretched over the city like a quiet afterthought, and the streets of New York carried on as they always did, people moving, traffic building, headlines shifting, while somewhere between all of it, a story had already begun to fracture, though most did not know it yet, and in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown, Chief Daniel Briggs stood with practiced composure as cameras and microphones adjusted around him, his uniform crisp, his voice measured, delivering the same version of events he had shaped the night before, describing decisive action, coordinated response, a successful outcome, every word placed carefully, each sentence reinforcing the narrative that had already started to circulate across networks and feeds, and behind the cameras, aides nodded, officers stood at ease, the machinery of authority moving smoothly as it always had. Until it did not, because just as the chief reached the midpoint of his statement, a producer off to the side raised a hand, not interrupting, but signaling, and a screen nearby flickered, not part of the planned sequence, not part of the script, but already live, already feeding into the same broadcast, and for a brief second, no one reacted, because the shift was subtle, almost invisible, until the image resolved into something unmistakable, grainy footage from a snow-covered alley. The same angle Lena had studied, the same moment frozen and then brought to life again, and the room changed without a single word, the air tightening, the rhythm breaking, as the footage played, showing the old man stepping forward before any sirens, before any authority, moving with that same quiet precision that did not match the story being told, and Briggs's voice faltered for just a fraction of a second, not enough for most to notice, but enough for those who were watching closely, his eyes flicking briefly toward the screen, then back to the cameras. Attempting to maintain control, to continue, to speak over the image that now contradicted him without saying a word, but the damage had already begun, because the footage did not stop there, it zoomed, slowly, deliberately, focusing on the small detail that Lena had seen, the edge of metal beneath the coat, catching light, revealing just enough to suggest identity, just enough to raise a question that could not be ignored. And somewhere else, in rooms far removed from the cameras, phones began to ring, conversations shifted, confirmations passed quietly between people who understood the weight of what they were seeing, and back on the street, far from the noise of media and authority, Sam sat on a low concrete step outside a closed storefront, his cart parked beside him, Rusty resting at his feet, the morning light soft against the buildings, and he held a small paper cup in his hands, steam rising faintly into the cold air. His gaze unfocused, not watching anything in particular. Just existing in that quiet space between moments, unaware that his image was now moving across screens, that his presence was being pulled into a narrative he had never intended to enter, and as he lifted the cup slightly, the fabric of his coat shifted just enough for the metal tag beneath it to press forward, hidden, but no longer unseen, and across the city, in offices, in vehicles, in places where decisions were made without announcement, one thing became clear without being spoken, the story was no longer under control, and it was only a matter of time before someone arrived who did not need permission to correct it. The shift did not arrive with sirens or raised voices, it came in the form of a quiet interruption that no one in the room could ignore, because just as Chief Briggs attempted to regain control of the narrative, a man stepped into frame from the edge of the cameras, not announced, not invited, but immediately recognized by those who understood what presence meant without introduction, his posture straight, his uniform simple but carrying a weight that did not need explanation, and the room changed in an instant, conversations stopped, officers adjusted without being told, and even the cameras seemed to hesitate as if unsure whether to continue or stand still, and the man did not look at the cameras first, he looked at the screen still displaying the footage, watching it for a brief moment before turning his attention to Briggs, his gaze calm, not confrontational, but absolute, the kind of look that did not ask questions because it already held the answers, and when he spoke, his voice was steady, low, carrying across the room without effort, addressing no one and everyone at the same time, stating simply that the report being given was incomplete, not wrong in tone, not aggressive, just precise, and that single word settled heavier than any accusation, and Briggs stood still, his expression tightening just slightly, the confidence from moments before now measured against something he could not easily override, and the man took one step forward, not toward the cameras, but toward the truth that had already begun to surface, and he asked for the footage to be replayed, not as a request, but as a correction, and it was done immediately. The screen resetting, the alley appearing once more, the snow falling again, the old man stepping into view before anything else, and this time, No one spoke over it, no one tried to frame it, they simply watched, and when the moment came where the small piece of metal caught the light beneath the coat, the man's gaze did not shift, he did not need confirmation, and when the clip ended, he turned slightly, his attention now moving beyond the room, beyond the broadcast, as if addressing something larger than the moment itself, and then he said the name. Clearly, Samuel Carter, and the effect was immediate, not loud, not chaotic, but absolute, because that name did not belong in a question, it belonged in a record, in a history that could not be rewritten by convenience, and Briggs did not respond, not because he chose not to, but because there was nothing left to say that would hold, and outside, across the city, the broadcast continued, the footage now undeniable, the story shifting in real time as people watched, as phones rang, as conversations changed direction, and on a quiet sidewalk far from the cameras, Sam remained seated, unaware of the room, unaware of the name being spoken, his focus still on the simple warmth of the cup in his hands, Rusty resting close, the city moving around them as it always had, until a vehicle slowed nearby, not with urgency, not with flashing lights, but with quiet intent, and the door opened, and a man stepped out, his posture familiar in a way that did not need explanation, walking toward Sam with measured steps that carried respect rather than authority, and Sam looked up, his eyes meeting the man's, and for a brief moment, the noise of the city seemed to fall away, replaced by something older, something understood without words, and the man stopped a few feet away, standing straight, his hand rising slowly. Deliberately, not as a gesture for show, but as something earned long before that morning, and he saluted, not to a uniform, not to a rank, but to the man in front of him, and Sam did not return it immediately, he simply looked at him, the years between them passing in silence, before giving the smallest nod, not accepting recognition, not rejecting it, just acknowledging it, and then he lowered his gaze, lifting the cup once more, as if nothing had changed, because for him, it had not, and as the man lowered his hand, the moment settled into something quiet and complete, a correction made without noise, a truth restored without force, and somewhere, far beyond that street, the story finished not with a headline, but with something far more enduring, the kind of respect that does not need to be spoken to be understood.